From Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and the studios of 850 AM WFTL, this is Outlaw, America's alternative voice.
Streaming around the world at outlawshow.com.
This week, a commercial-free broadcast featuring our very special guest, Congressman Alcee Hastings of Florida's 23rd Congressional District. Your host for Outlaw, equal rights activist and former Fort Lauderdale City Commissioner, Dean Trantalis.
Welcome back. Our guest tonight is Congressman Alcee Hastings. One of the other important things to know about Congressman Hastings is not just his involvement with the gay and lesbian community, but the history of his involvement. The fact that he has been a friend of the community for a very, very long time, certainly longer than even my involvement back in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And he has been a constant voice, a mentor, even when it was at odds with the dominant philosophy within the African American community. Certainly there are many strides which we have to make within the African American community to join together to try to snuff out discrimination. But unfortunately, that message is not easy to bear when we have conflicting philosophies in certain areas, especially the more religious aspects of the African American community. We've seen members of the African American community who hold leadership roles who don't always take the position that you have. Mm-hmm. And I bring up the other congressman from this area, Congressman Allen West. And I'm not going to say that he necessarily represents the religious community within the African American community, but he certainly represents a conservative point of view. Mm-hmm. Now, for those who are listening and want to know why didn't I invite Congressman West on my show?
Have you ever invited him?
I invited Congressman West on my show. In November of last year, I went to visit him in Washington with a group of members of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce.
It's called the Fly-In.
Yeah. And on 3 separate occasions, he looked at me straight in the eye and he says, "I will be there for you." Mm-hmm. And so when someone has to say it 3 times, I'm always suspicious because then I know it's not going to happen. But we did offer him a platform here in my program. I'm not adversarial, I'm not confrontational, and therefore I don't know what he'd be afraid of. Mm-hmm. But a similar situation happened last year in the summer, where the Wilton Manors Business Association invited him, and the gay community was a little upset that he was going to be speaking in their backyard, and the Business Association, whose president is not gay, disinvited him. Yeah. And I thought that was a mistake.
I do too.
You know? Mm-hmm. So we made every effort, we meaning me and other activists, made every effort to extend the invitation for him to come back. And I don't know, maybe he was just politically posturing, but he just made the decision, they shut me down, I'm not going to come to Wilton Manors. So after that episode, since I was one of the people who was involved with that, I went to Washington with these other folks, and I reached out once again, and I thought, it's important to hear everybody's point of view. I want to hear why he thinks the way he does, why he was against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, mm-hmm. why he's against the Defense of Marriage Act, mm-hmm. why he's against the ENDA, mm-hmm. which is the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. Mm-hmm. And yet we'll never hear that, mm-hmm. because he speaks only to his own groups that are sympathetic to him, and he doesn't really have to create answers because no one ever asks the question of him.
Politicians can be insular, and many are.
You aren't.
Yeah, well, I don't have any hesitancy about learning.
Or about who you are.
Yeah, and projecting in an effort to make sure that people understand, as their representative, where I'm coming from. I said to a group of young children at Pembroke Pines Charter School on Tuesday or Wednesday, broaden your horizons. You know, when you limit yourself, and when politicians limit themselves, then their view is in a niche. And I try to make sure that that's not the case. I go to the opera show like I go to the country and western show. I like jazz, I like gospel, you know. And
You're quite the Renaissance man.
Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, Bo Diddley, and B.B. King, you see. So it's no need to limit yourself. And that's what Alan and others who act in, and I can always find sycophants. I can always find people that agree with me only. And I take great pride in having an extremely diverse staff that includes gays, more women than men, that includes a young French woman that works on my staff, a young man from the Philippines, and that way we learn from each other. And I encourage them to question me and to give advice. I don't know everything, and neither does Alan, and neither does anybody in Congress. And what people need to understand about Congress is they put their pants on one leg at a time just like everybody else. And they're nothing but just human beings. Some of them had good accidents of birth that allowed that they are wealthy, but by and large, it's a mixture of people that it would be wise for he and others to reach out. I don't have any hesitancy going into Republican parts of the district to explain the point of view that I come from. And last night I spoke, Saturday night, I spoke in Gifford, Florida, and there were Republicans in the audience. And what I said to them was, if I offend you, it's deliberate. So it's we don't have any problems, because I'm going to tell you what the price of stuff is a pound downtown. And as
what was the reaction?
Well, at the end, when I finished and related things to them about why we should be about the business of education and why we should be about the business of not cutting Medicaid. Listen to what this governor did. Last week, he said that his drop-dead position was $1.2 billion for education. That's commendable, Governor Scott. But during your tenure, $2.7 billion has been taken out of education. And so if you took it out, now you're going to put half back, but more important, then you want to pay for what you're going to put back out of Medicaid, the poorest people in our society. That spills over into not just gay people, but it spills over into the AIDS question. I'm in Congress during the period of the Ryan White Act and its development. 2 years before I got there, the act itself was made law, but there are many of us that it was dropping off the charts, and we had to keep it going from a reauthorization standpoint. The same with the ADAP for AIDS. Listen, I can't sit idle and know that 25 million people in this world that we know about have died of AIDS, and we know that there are a substantial number of people in the whole of our society, the world, as well as in America for sure, that don't even know that they have HIV. And we have to be about research. We have to be about providing for people. Look how long it took us to get to the point where some few people can continue an active life and contribute in society by virtue of the medications. And so what do these people do? They want to cut the programs that allow for the medication. I want to begin with that. I'm not mad with rich people, Dean. All we are asking for is fairness, and for all of us. For me, I paid $41,000 in income taxes last year, but I would be happy to pay $51,000 if I knew that the Ryan White, ADAP, education for children, health care, and those kinds of measures were going to be attended to, then it's not going to cause me a problem. And so I don't understand why there shouldn't be shared sacrifice in our nation.
For some reason, it seems that America is returning to a point the philosophy of the early settlers when the Pilgrims came here, and where God would shine upon you if He wants you to succeed in life, and if you don't, it's your own fault. This Protestant ethic that began our country, okay, never has
This
left.
is the same country that enslaved God's people.
All of that, correct. And so they come to so that Protestant ethic never seems to have left the American psyche, and we've had moments where we have been a little bit more enlightened. You know, certainly the 18th century, certainly the 20th century, but every so often it rears its ugly head that it's you, the individual, that must succeed, and if you don't, it's your own fault. And there were many Republican candidates for president who said those exact words. So they say, well, all you need are the tools to succeed, and that's all America should be about.
Right.
Well, what is that tool? No government regulation, no taxes on business. They don't talk about non-discrimination. They don't talk about leveling the playing field based on concepts such as equality
And even
equal
if you
rights.
had everything that they ask, what would they do about the increasing numbers of people that are impoverished in this country?
Well, their answer, like Adam Smith would say, you know, that invisible hand of private enterprise would eventually scoop them up and take care of the rest of society. But history has shown that never ever happens.
No.
In fact, what did happen under the George W. Bush era was just the opposite. No new jobs. Net jobs were created
correct.
under unleashed, a completely unfettered business environment.
And look at what happened on Wall Street as a result of that.
Exactly. He started. So the very thought that this is the answer, clearly history shows us, is not the answer. So, and what is the answer? If you look under the Clinton administration, where we had higher taxes, where we had where regulation, while it wasn't eliminated, it was certainly in place enough to protect people and in the environment and so forth. We were actually running a surplus at the end of his 8-year term. That hasn't happened since Lyndon Johnson, and before that, it was before FDR. So clearly, you know, the rhetoric never seems to match the reality. And so here we are at a point in our lives where, and I bring this up, the economy up, simply because of something you said earlier, and that is that when people feel threatened, when their jobs feel threatened, their livelihood feels threatened, they attack others.
Yeah, the most vulnerable.
The most vulnerable. And so when it comes to sharing rights, when it comes to bringing people into the family, so to speak, they feel threatened. Like, if you get my job, then I can't work, or if you're able to afford this house, then I won't be able to. If you know, this idea of sharing seems to have left the culture of America.
When you said house, it brought to mind the fact that 47% of the people in the state of Florida have mortgages on homes that are worth less
They're all
than
underwater, 47%.
47%. And next year we're going to witness even more foreclosures. And what winds up happening is we could do something about that with one fell swoop with 218 members of Congress, and I really wish in the Senate we didn't need but 51, but those arcane rules there allow that you have to have 60. But without getting into it, I introduced legislation that said that if you had a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac mortgage, which carries you up to a little more than $500,000 on a home, that you would receive a piece of paper saying that your mortgage now is the prevailing rate. Can you imagine?
Is it prevailing value?
It's a prevailing rate on mortgages.
Oh, the
in
interest
other
rate.
words, 3.89% last week. So everybody, whether they were in a $500,000 house or a $50,000 house, would have a reduced mortgage rate. The banks wouldn't lose a dime. It would put a whole lot of liquidity in the system, but I need 218 votes. And it becomes extremely difficult to achieve what sounds like a very simple
What's
aid.
the argument against it?
The argument against it is the banks don't want it because of for the same reason that they didn't modify folks' homes. We did, the Obama administration, in my judgment, failed to do what was necessary in a large enough manner. $150 billion wasn't going to address the significant number of homes that were underwater. And this is a serious crisis. Now, you also said another word that triggered a thought with me, and that is attack. Dean, we left the In God We Trust argument about 6 weeks ago, right, to go to the guns argument, to federalize the right to carry a weapon in this country. There are 250 gun shows from October to the end of this year in this country. They sell guns. I don't know whether you've ever gone inside one of them. It is a frightening thing, the pace that people are buying guns and bullets, and they're doing so ostensibly because of some guarded notion, and you're beginning to see a level of violence that you've not seen before. Right here, you're seeing on Craigslist, all sorts of things. Well, tell me, putting this in the context of housing, when people lose their home, they lose their hope. And one of the biggest myths is that it was poor people who bought homes that they couldn't afford that caused the bubble to burst. That is not why the bubble bursted. The bubble bursted because of debt swaps and junk bonds and all sorts of things. And that's why they can't foreclose on these homes, because they sold them 4 and 5 times. Ron Paul is absolutely correct when he talks about this particular issue. And so in the final analysis, what we are leading to is putting a lot of people on the streets. You cut Medicaid. Now you want to address Medicare and Social Security in a negative way. And what you're going to lead to is, when you don't have any hope, you go to the streets, and so you're going to have more violence. And so what do you do when you have more violence? If you're my Republican colleagues, you cut the police department, you cut the teachers, you cut since when did school teachers and firefighters and police officers get to be the bad people?
Or Social Security, which is making money. They want to cut the benefits, and it's showing a surplus.
It is very disheartening to serve in the House of Representatives and to watch what's happening, and to only have a few voices that speak up and out and often enough, not just on the floor of the House of Representatives, but elsewhere. There is another danger that's looming that will take place in the next decade, and that is the developing elitism of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate.
Listen to me.
People coming there who are multimillionaires and having little appreciation at all for people that are in poverty or that are working. I said at a television station last week, I was talking with 3 people. I said, let's the 4 of us just decide that we're going to have a month where we're going to live on the new minimum wage in Florida, $7.67 an hour. And we're going to work 8 hours for 5 days, and then see how much of the obligations we can meet. These are extremely difficult times, and I don't see it getting better anytime soon. And tragically, this developing elitism stems from our origin in this country. Remember that the founders of this country, who were in fact brilliant and did in fact come up with a document, the Constitution, that has outlived any other in the history of civilization. And so I accept all of that. But I remind people they wouldn't let their wives vote, and they wouldn't let their brothers who didn't have property vote. They were elitists. And so if we come back to that position, then the rest of it falls in place. And I said to a colleague of mine that came out of a meeting of the super committee that I didn't agree with at all. And when he came out, he said, man, I used to think that these people were mean. He said, now I'm beginning to think they're evil. And this is Jim Clyburn, a congressman from South Carolina, was the only black member on the super committee. And I said to him, I said, Jim, you have to remember, some of the people that were on that super committee are the legatees.
This is the budget committee.
Yeah, are the legatees of the people that held your foreparents and mine in slavery for a substantial number of years. And it's in their DNA. You know, there are kids in Congress that came there with $10, $11 million that never worked a day in their lives. They had, as I said earlier, a good genetic accident.
Right.
Okay?
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Which I know is important to the gay community, and I don't know if you know the answer, but certainly it's something we need to think about. In the African American community, the LGBT community finds it often at odds with many of the leaders within the African American community, and oftentimes they are told that, well, it's the religious context in which many of the members of the African American community live, and therefore we're never going to be able to overcome that. I'm going to call it a predisposition. I don't want to call it a prejudice, but certainly it doesn't help us in advancing equal rights. In fact, in Florida, when we had a constitutional amendment put on the ballot to prevent gay marriage in Florida, it passed, and many people thought that it was because the African American community came out to vote for the president, that it brought people to the polls from that community that would not have otherwise voted, and that's what tipped the balance to create a 60% plurality to get that amendment.
California made the same argument.
Right. And whether it's true or not, the point is, I think we both know that the sentiments are there. And what are we going to do, you and I, you, Congressman Hastings, and me, Dean Trantalis, what are we going to do to change that?
We're doing that now, and I've been critical of people just on this radio show in the African American community for being intolerant. There's a lot of pain in, first off, I'm not so sure I accept the notion of gay community and black community. We're talking about people who live in a certain geographic territory.
You're right.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about me. I get tired of being called a black leader. What the hell is that?
Well, I understand.
You understand?
That. Well, I understand that.
Yeah.
But to some extent, it is characterized that way, and we find that sometimes in the African American community, we hear people saying, "Well, don't try to steal away our civil rights movement by trying to equate it with
I think that's a very small group of people.
Is it? Okay.
Without question.
Okay.
But you ask what could we do? What I say is that we need to find people and involve them in political activities. There are, as you and I know, a substantial number of gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgendered African American people in this community. But when it comes to the political side of things, you don't see them in the log cabin or group or the Dolphin Democratic Club. And so what I'm saying is they need to step up and get involved so as how they can push back. How does the organist sitting in the church feel when the preacher is railing about homosexuality? How does the community in Atlanta feel when the preacher is charged with and settles cases having involved himself with people of the same sex because of his choice? How do they? I mean, this is a mega church, you understand. So my point being, I'm only one voice, and I continue. I don't care where I am, whether it's my minister or anybody else. I will point out to them that tolerance is required of us all. And if we want people to be tolerant, then it starts with us, in my judgment. And I think you and I do that with regularity. But I'm not certain that other politicians, African American or gay or white, do that with regularity. Thus, it falls by the wayside because they don't want to be branded. I have not had one person come up to me and say, I'm not going to vote for you because you favor gay marriage, or that you because anybody that knows where I am knows that it is all encompassing and not just about an issue. And that's what the gay community can do. The gay community must get past just advocating about gay rights and advocate not just for every aspect of society, engineering, research, music, entertainment, the whole 9 yards are full of people that are gay. Black women don't mind wearing the design of gay designers that are African American and white. So let's just get real. That's what has to happen. We have to make the world know how to be real.
And the first step is getting involved.
Indeed.
Okay. The second step is understanding your own community and knowing how to educate them.
Absolutely.
And the third step, of course, is never stepping back from the challenge, because clearly there will be many obstacles, and you have to be extremely strong in the effort, because it takes a long time to educate people.
It does, regrettably. I also believe that we should make sure that textbooks and other outlets for media have offerings that involve those who are gay in our society. The same as I advocated for textbooks to speak realistically about civil rights issues, I see the issues of gays in our society as a civil rights and human rights issue.
Okay. Well, on that note, we will conclude this show.
You mean it's over?
It's over. I know. We spoke almost a whole hour.
But it just begins.
It just begins. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you, Congressman Hastings, from being here.
Thank you.
It's an important milestone for a person of your stature and history to be able to participate in a dialogue such as this. Mm-hmm. And your voice is a strong voice that hopefully many will hear and follow. And tomorrow we'll be speaking with our friends and colleagues, and you'll be heading back to Washington after the festivities of Martin Luther King. And I hope you'll speak well of this show and the things that you may have learned in participating in this debate.
Indeed.
So again, this is our final show, and it has been a wonderful experience, and I want to thank all of those who have been involved, particularly our producer, Danny Pryor, who's standing behind the camera,
Thanks,
photographing us, and my associate producer who works in my office, Brian French, who was in charge of scheduling each and every one of our guests. He was the one harassing everyone in your office, Congressman.
Okay.
And for the many people who encouraged me to do this, and who felt that this was an important milestone within our own community to have this alternative voice. I had always felt that Outlaw was something that was a long time coming, and now we have Outlaw. It's on outlawshow.com. All 12 episodes are now podcasts on the internet and can be heard and viewed at your leisure. So please make it a point. And I want to thank everyone once again. And again, Congressman, have a good evening.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.